Live from the Greater Toronto Area, it's the It's Just a Show first anniversary year in review spectacular! Hi, I'm producer Chris. I'm the mostly silent third voice on this podcast. Today, as we record this on March 21st, 2018, it's been exactly 1 year since the release of the very first episode of It's Just a Show. We thought we'd take this opportunity to look back at the 24 episodes of Mystery Science Theater 3000 that we've discussed, the over 1 day of podcasting that we've put out into the world, and the ever-growing number of listeners and friends we've met along the way. I'm joined by regular It's Just a Show hosts Beth and Adam, and I've got a few questions for them about these 24 episodes. We've also asked a few questions of our listeners, and of some MST3K fans who aren't yet listeners, and I'll let you know the results of that survey real soon. But first, Adam, Beth, are you ready?
I was born ready.
Hey-o.
Excellent. Our first question goes like this. Some people watch movies even if they aren't being riffed. And sometimes you see a movie saw riffing, and a few years later, you get to see it again on MST3K. So which of the movies that we saw riffed this year would you most want to watch unMSTed?
This was a surprisingly difficult decision, and I would narrow it down by category. But for one answer, if you want to have a party movie to watch totally unriffed, that I think would be a fabulous time, that movie has got to be Future War.
What?
Yes.
Okay.
This is the movie. This is not the episode. This is the movie. It's got dinosaurs. It's got so many things. Beth, come on.
It's got halfway houses.
Yeah. Makes for great entertainment.
I seem to recall during the episode that you in fact argued that the MST3K treatment made the movie worse.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's debatable. It's still not something I would want to watch on my own. Is it just the dinosaurs that are doing it for you, Adam?
Well, what? It's got the dinosaurs. It's got Robert Zadar. It's got a bonkers plot. It seems to have something crazy happen every 5 minutes. I think it's a downright delight. And that's the one that I would want to watch with a party because there's going to be chatter and loud stuff every few minutes. For an individual isolated viewing, I mean, you want something that is personal and has a bit of a auteurship to it. And for that, I would suggest Teenagers from Outer Space.
Going for a black and white one.
Yeah.
Good for you.
The majority of MST3K episodes, I think, might be.
Yeah, which made this really hard to decide. I don't dislike black and white movies, but when they're not good, they're really not good.
There's mounting evidence that you do not like black and white movies, Beth.
One of my favorite movies is Bringing Up Baby. It's great.
Especially when it's been colorized.
I'll say this. I don't dislike black and white movies. In fact, I think movies from the 20s and 30s are some of the best things that Hollywood ever produced. But once the Hays Code hits, the 40s and 50s, I don't know, just kind of a leaden, dull editing kind of approach takes in. So it's not that they're black and white. It comes with a whole kind of leadenness. And that is most of these movies. There's no movie pre-Hays Code here. So it's not about the black and white. It just is a symptom of it being bad to me.
So Beth, which movie would you watch unMSTed?
Star Crash.
Excellent choice. I didn't pick that one because I have watched it unMSTed and own a copy of it.
It's just so pretty. It doesn't matter that the plot doesn't make any sense. And like you could just watch this without, well, I wouldn't say without the sound because the soundtrack is lovely, but it's just a feast for the eyes. And in the same way that Barbarella is, not the greatest movie, but it's great to watch because it's episodic and there's a new outfit every scene. Like, it's totally worth watching on its own.
And I would say that I like this movie, or I like Star Crash, way more than Barbarella. It rules. Star Crash. Where are my Star Crash sequels? Get on those, Hollywood.
Weirdly enough, it's more feminist.
Yeah. I'd stand by that. Stella Star for president.
I might add Girls Town. I don't think anyone else would enjoy it, but I enjoy watching it just because I really like Mimi Van Doren, and she's a pleasure to watch. Just kicking ass and taking names and wearing ridiculous outfits once again.
She is great, but I did watch a bit of that unMSTed when we did that episode, and it is a lot slower paced without jokes being told all the time.
That's what my suspicion was.
Even so, I think, you know what, the sheer charisma of Mamie could carry that titanic weight of boredom. But because she's fabulous in that movie, and Mel Torme is surprisingly good in it. It's a well-made movie, surprisingly.
Yeah, they just have a lot of chirpy actors that kind of rise above the slow molasses plot at times. So, you know, it would not be unpleasurable to watch. Whereas it was really hard to go through this and think of anything that would not put me in a bad mood for being forced to watch it unMSTed.
Wow, I was actually having trouble narrowing it down because Girls Town was one I thought of. Star Crash I thought I would disqualify because I do own it. This was tough. I liked a lot of these movies.
Maybe it's because I have a kid now. It's just like my viewing time is very narrow now. I don't have time for having a fail and be like, oh, well, there goes my free time for a week. Too bad Santa Claus wasn't as good as advertised.
Well, I think Santa Claus is as good as advertised. What are you talking about? That movie is crazy.
Also, what did your daughter think of Santa Claus? That's the important question.
I have not. I think she would be afraid of Pitch. So, and possibly of Santa Claus.
Yeah, Santa Claus is definitely scarier than Pitch. I would imagine that your daughter would start crying at the sight of, oh, I don't know, Santa Claus's weird sentient wall mouth.
I think that's pretty normal by kids' show standards.
I don't know, man.
Well, it's interesting because, of course, everybody tends to think Mystery Science Theater 3000 is where, you know, the movies are all bad movies.
Yeah, but those people are wrong, and they need to go to jail.
A lot of the movies that get featured on MST3K are centered on monsters. Some of these monsters are scary, some are weird, some are just a puddle of cuddle. What do you think was the best monster? Beth, let's start with you this time.
I was thinking about Baragon. He had a wall-eyed charm that really appealed to me. He looks very dopey. Probably one of the most lovable rubber monster suits we've seen. But I think I'm going to give it to the crawling eye monsters because they seem to be doing something very different from most of the monster movies in the 50s and 60s. It was viscous and twitchy and kind of terrifying. So I like the creativity there. Way to step off. Otherwise boring movie. It conquered the world. No, it wasn't in
it was in a crawling eye.
I was just thinking about It Conquered the World as the example of a monster that was trying to be creative, but ended up just looking like a smelly pickle.
He looks like a jack-o'-lantern, and I like him. He's cute. Leave Lee Van Cleef's lover alone.
Adam, what about you?
This may shock you, but the crawling eye for design immediately was the first choice.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, I love a lot of monsters here. Baragon rules, Gamera rules, Gillman rules. There are some amazing monsters that we saw this year. Crawling eye for sheer design, it's an incredibly well pulled off effect. And Black and White was extremely kind to the movie, where the combination of monochrome and fog made them look weirdly real.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something nightmarish, like that shot that's only used, I think, in the earliest of season 2 episodes, where the crawling eye is just barreling down at you when Joel and the bots are in the theaters. It's like genuinely kind of scary. I feel like an old-timey person watching his first television and having a train come at him. I would throw in, though, a runner-up, because we've talked about the coolest monster, but we have not talked about the most interesting monster. Jan in the Pan. Jan in the Pan is a decapitated lady who just wants to die and perhaps never can. So what's she going to do? If you were immortal, what would you do? Bitch at people you hate and try to get powerful people to ruin your enemies' lives? In this case, the powerful person is a giant with a mask on. But still.
That's an interesting twist. So it's more like the monster is the concept rather than like the costume.
Yeah, I mean, don't you think that Jan, as an undead lady head, wrapped up in bandages, rasping for some reason despite a lack of a voice box, and no vocal cords, I presume, and yet she could talk, so that there's already something supernatural or not quite right about it. And you get the sense that, like, maybe had that ending lingered on a little bit more, the closet monster would have like run in and grabbed her head, and then they would have gone off and had an adventure.
I like that ending.
Yeah.
I like the approach you took for that, Adam. I'll say my runner-up are the reptoids in Future War. Those they've become really popular, the T-Rex costumes that are kind of rubbery, so their heads are always going like booga 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 booga.
Yeah.
That they just look like that. Like they haven't someone hasn't stepped into them to making them go booga 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 booga.
Well, there's that great video of that guy who like jumps in a raft while wearing that costume, and like that's incredible. However, I think on air at the time, the thing it reminded me most of was the Toronto Raptor mascot who fell on his ass,
which we will add again because that is the most incredible thing that has ever happened.
Oh, I almost forgot to watch it today.
Okay, now a question just for Adam.
Ooh.
So, Adam, you're the host of popular It's Just a Show segment, The Score Corner, or Scorner, where you get to use your love of film scores to explain why we sometimes hear violins in a movie, even when there are no violins on screen. Which movie that we watched do you think featured the best music?
Well, you know what? Mystery Science Theater 3000 has had a number of before they were stars, famous folks in it, including composers. And even though the entire series, up till season 11, has featured some early scores by Elmer Bernstein, James Horner, Richard Band, Ennio Morricone, Masaru Sato, and even John Michael Thor, Titanic talents all, the best score, the score I listened to the most, and the score I owned prior to starting this podcast, was Star Crash.
Yep.
And it's a beautiful score, and I still can't get over the clever thing that John Barry did time and again when he either had A, a space movie, B, a silly movie, or C, more likely, a silly space movie, was to approach it by being as kind of somber and glacial as possible. This really kind of like slow moving score, so that even the action scenes never really rise above like the trot of music you would hear in a figure skating routine. Like, it's really inspired, I have to say. Like, this is a great score that I listen to time and again.
Well, I can say that was my runner-up, but...
You were not asked this question, Beth.
But now I want to know.
All right, go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to withhold it then.
No!
No. It has to be Zombie Nightmare. I genuinely enjoy listening to the songs on that soundtrack, and not just the pop hits that were included, but the actual like incidental music, which Adam was very kind enough to somehow find me a copy, and I very much appreciate that. But like 80s stadium rock, not my thing, but some of this music is just so good, and I genuinely enjoy it. And I can remember when Zombie Nightmare first came, when I first saw it on MST3K, I tried to find that soundtrack. In the 90s, it did not exist. So, but this is one of the wonders of living in a post-millennial time. I can now, and I do.
Well, one thing, and I only got it out of this show, one of the reasons why I'm glad I do this podcast is that it got me to give the music of Girls' School a listen, because now I'm a huge fan.
Yeah.
They're excellent, but I have a far more important thing, Beth. You have to rank now. Which is the better Thor masterpiece? Any one of his songs from Zombie Nightmare, excluding Midnight Man, because that's Rusty Hamilton's song, or We Accept the Challenge.
We Accept the Challenge is an amazing song.
Yes.
Even though Zombie Nightmare as a whole has the better music, We Accept the Challenge should be added as a B-side if the soundtrack is ever re-released.
Oh my God, yes. That is for, of course, Rock and Roll Nightmare, the weird follow-up with phallic puppets, as mentioned on the previous episode of this show.
Don't watch it. Just go find the song.
Or just watch the ending.
Yeah, the ending is incredible.
One of our listeners who responded to our survey mentioned that they thought our episode on Zombie Nightmare was their favorite episode.
Oh, cool.
And the comment that they said as to why they liked it was, you guys really appreciated the soundtrack.
Aw.
Yay.
All right, and now a question for Beth. Beth, you're known to enjoy living inside a house, and you take great pleasure when the movies we watch feature interesting rooms, buildings, atria, and sacrificial altars. Which do you think was the best architectural space we saw this year?
I did go on and on about the waiting room that is at the very beginning of Danger Death Ray, which is kind of Euro ultra-modern richness at its finest, red furniture and teal walls and really fun light. I don't know how else to describe it, but it's great. And you can find a version of the movie unMSTed that's in quite good quality, so you can just see how beautiful that room is. But I think I'd have to give it to Iga's Econo Lodge suite.
Shock.
I don't usually consider myself to be much of a fan of 60s and 70s interior design, but I just like how it kind of was a preview of things to come. It's like, oh yeah, brick and wood paneling, and it's full of trophies for some goddamn thing, and there's something on the wall that looks like a hi-fi unit or maybe an oven. Otherwise, it's quite empty, and it's very brown. It's just like, oh, okay. Yeah, this is what all of America and Canada looked like for the next 30 years. It was just, it hadn't really hit yet, but there it was. In fact, you can see a version of that in Zombie Nightmare, the sniveling detectives room with the Hummels on the wall. That's basically, the down-market version of what's happening in Iga.
Well, Canada of the 80s is remarkably similar to America of the 60s.
That joke has been made, yes.
Indeed. In that very episode, Zombie Nightmare. Oh, man. If I may, much like jumping on my question, I also must jump on Beth's specific question, in that the greatest architecture, the greatest interior design was not featured in a movie that was set on Earth. No, it was in Star Crash. All those amazing sets. And you know what? When you're there, it's colorful. It looks like IKEA has won the space race. And there's so many lights and purple hallways and things like that. My God, every time that you'll be in space, you'll be having a wonderful Christmas time.
Okay, a question for both of you now. So
none of us should answer.
Exactly. Very few of the characters in these movies are entirely nude. Even a caveman like Iga manages to hide his organs of generation with a sensible animal pelt. But overall, clothing, who wore it best? What's the best outfit you saw?
Well, see, this is why I was holding out on mentioning StarCraft for interior design, because the costumes are really what makes that movie, I think. And Stella's, I think I'd have to bring out one of her first outfits she wears, which is described as vampire lingerie with black thigh-high heels, which she's wearing to work in a mine. That moment just made me laugh out loud, where you see her hauling a giant marble to throw down a shaft in thigh-high leather boots. No, probably pleather.
Oh, please, Star Crash spared no expense.
It was just such a juxtaposition. It's just like, but we need her to be hot, but we also need her to be working in a hot mine.
She's hot in all senses.
And everybody else is literally wearing what you'd wear in a mine so that you don't get dirty and cut. Not Stella, though. Nothing affects her.
Yeah, she's already cut. If you pay attention to the Slack, I believe you'll find the outfit here.
Hold on. There we go. There it is. Yes.
Yeah, you can really tell that Caroline Munro is a model because, and I feel bad saying this because she seems like the nicest person. Caroline Munro is not much of an actress, having seen her in a bunch of things. But, because I have to say, like, her vocal performance is improved by the fact that she was dubbed in Star Crash. Nonetheless, how great does she look there? Because when she's not saying anything, she has such charisma and, frankly, sassiness.
Yeah.
Like, Caroline Munro on paper is perfect to be a ballsy space swashbuckling pirate who goes on misadventures. And dubbing her helps a little bit, but the fact that the script doesn't really know what to do with this amazing character sort of hampers it, because you kind of forget that it's supposed to be her movie.
Yeah, and I think just this pose, like, obviously she's meant to be sexy. She's wearing a very tiny bikini, but her pose and the fierce look in her eyes, she's basically the male version of Sean Connery in Zardoz.
Zardoz is my favorite cereal.
Zardoz, sorry. But it's the same kind of like, yeah, you're wearing something ridiculous, but you are killing it.
Oh yeah, she owns it. She has the terrifying confidence of a divine.
Yeah.
Is that your favorite Stella Star outfit?
Well, I have I have a soft spot for her plastic see-through spacesuit, but no, I think that's my favorite. The black spider bikini.
Mm-hmm. How did you feel when the spider straps were removed in later scenes? It's still the same outfit, but those are gone. And then she shows up with the same outfit, but there's a cape attached, but the spider strings is still gone.
It's versatile. I'll say that. It's the most versatile bikini I've ever seen.
Yeah, that bikini has been remodeled more times than Marge Simpson's Chanel suit.
Damn it! Why do you always get to them before me?
Years of training as a garbage person. I don't know. I was raised by a VCR instead of parents. I would also throw this whole category to Star Crash. Any best costume category demands to be won by Star Crash each and every year. It's a gorgeous movie to look at in all respects, but Stella's costumes are excellent. And there should just be more characters, men and women, who just change into fabulous outfits constantly. I think that was one of the appeals of the old school James Bond movies, when he would actually do some spy stuff. So he wasn't always wearing a dinner jacket.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite outfit of hers, though, is kind of a tie. She has what I would describe as, and there'll be links in the show notes for all of these beautiful outfits. She has what I would describe as figure skating armor later on in the movie.
I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, in 2 variants. And I'm kind of torn. And I think I kind of prefer her original version, but I love the later edition when she's wearing her space helmet. This is it in silver and black, being uploaded to the Slack.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious as to what your preference is, because I honestly can't make the choice. They're both great, with or without helmet. So collect all your Star Crash Toys kits with all the variants of Stella Star. But that's the silver version, silver and black.
Silver and black.
I like that, but I'm also just as fond of the red version.
The red and gold version?
Yeah. And that one has a cape, which also adds to it. But yeah, look at that.
Yeah, it's like Princess Aurora in Sleeping Beauty. Except that it's in space and she's a pirate.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yes, of course. But I really just now want to see a Disney animated adaptation of this movie.
So, MST3K was famously willing to make jokes about any and everything, and likewise, It's Just a Show has given you both an excuse to do a bit of research and get some learning into your brains about all sorts of different things. What's the most interesting thing you've learned in that research?
I have 3 simple words. John Romulus Brinkley. The Goat Man. The Man Goat. Just to recap, for anyone who is scratching their heads at that reference, John Romulus Brinkley was a charlatan doctor who got his medical diploma from a mill called the Kansas City Eclectic. But he is infamous for, among other things, providing a cure for impotence by sewing in goat glands into male scrotums. I love it. Combines so many things that I adore personally. Medical malpractice, being a con man, and getting away with being a con man for a super long time. I love it. And sure enough, he was extremely successful for a while. Before coming to a penniless end, as all charlatans should in real life. But my God, the fact that he exists and had as successful a run as the goat balls guy, to the point where there's actually a Buster Keaton short in which a sad Buster Keaton is trying to get to a goat gland specialist. That's specifically a John Romulus Brinkley ref, which I had no idea when we did that episode on Brain That Wouldn't Die. But anyway, yeah, John Romulus Brinkley, my favorite thing that I've learned. And honestly, it's easy because I'm a big movie dork, and there's a lot of stuff that I already knew. Like, I didn't really have to do much research for our Gamera episodes because I know that stuff. And same with Star Crash. I've read about the director. I know the making of that movie, and I know John Barry. Not personally, because he's a ghost. But if I knew him, that would be cool. I've always wanted to have a ghost friend. But there's sometimes you can, and I know that's the same for you, Beth, in different areas where it's like you can rely on what you know. For this program, put it to good use. But reading up about certain things, like the making of the Creature from the Black Lagoon movies, was just fascinating because there was so much I didn't know that I never explored. But the best part of doing research for this show is getting into these crazy parts of history that for some reason the schools dare not teach, even though they contain the most valuable life lessons of all.
I like how you had more information for us about Mr. Goat Glands. Glenn Goat Glands.
Glenn Goat Glands. I love it. I watched a movie because I watched a couple of things, I guess, related to things discussed on the show. And in an episode after Brain That Wouldn't Die, someone recommended Nuts, the documentary about John Romulus Brinkley, which I hadn't even heard of, and it had just come out, I think, 2 years prior. I watched it. I have to say it's disappointing, but it did lead to that invaluable clip of Buster Keaton going to a goat clan specialist, and my jaw dropped. The world had Romulus fever.
This is one of the reasons I also love movies from like the 30s, and like silent films, because they haven't been cleaned up yet in terms of what is considered acceptable. So there's Modern Times, which is, if you haven't seen that one, Adam, it's actually really good.
I'll give it a shot.
And it has a really good sequence where the tramp is in jail and he accidentally takes a giant dose of cocaine.
Yeah, pre-code movies rule.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
I love how bawdy they get.
They make being on cocaine look like a lot of fun.
It's not, listeners. Don't do it.
No, you'll just turn into a Wall Street asshole. That's what happens when you do cocaine.
Yeah, man. Like a picture Christian Bale in any of the movies where he's using an American accent, and that's who you'll be. Or Christian Bale.
Guys, cocaine is our sponsor this episode.
This is by Square Cane. Do you need cheap, very usable cocaine? Square Cane.
Do you need to feel like you're going to conquer the world, but really you're just getting in everybody's way?
Do you want to know what it's like to have a cold all the time, yet at the same time the confidence of a raging erection, which you do not have because you're on cocaine? Also, you got goat balls in your scrotum.
Beth, your turn to answer the question.
Also, probably not a surprising one. My favorite thing to
to do cocaine to
mainline is interior design, and
right up your nose, yeah.
So I really enjoyed finding out about the rise and fall of TGI Fridays, which came out of the Gamera versus Baragon episode, because it also pairs with another interest I have, which is the rise and fall of prominent businesses, and how they get out of step, and how something that once succeeded starts to fail with the changing times. I always find those narratives to be quite interesting. And TGI's is full of that, because it started as like a swinging singles bar and then tried to age with its audience into family-friendly dining, and then couldn't keep up with those millennials who love their chic, uncluttered minimalism, and now they're dying.
A shame. But yeah, I found the TGI Fridays thing to be quite interesting because I always associate it with, disgusting tat.
And a runner-up would be finding out about Tom Groff, who was the producer and writer of Teenagers from Outer Space, which is really, I didn't choose it because it's quite a sad story, and it ends with his unfortunate death quite early on. But a man with a dream, a marginalized man who nonetheless looked to the suburbs as maybe the saving grace of the world, and there's something very touching about that.
You know what? Two things. One, I almost chose Tom Groff for this as well. That was my runner-up, and it was really a coin toss between him and Brinkley. And second, has there ever been a story that ends in a fortunate death?
Well, old age, surrounded by people you love.
World War II.
I suppose World War II, I'll allow it. And old people dying, that's good entertainment. So you know what? Both your answers are correct. You're each getting $1 million on this episode of Answer a Question.
I mean, better than dying broke and of drug addiction.
But he thought he was Jesus. That's pretty cool. Jesus 2. And the sequel's much better than the original. I'd much rather have an old gay director as Jesus, wouldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
John Waters should be Jesus. Don't crucify him, though. He's had enough.
All right, well, now, so as we've learned, the two of you got to learn all sorts of interesting things about the world, but you also got to learn a lot about each other. After all, a year ago, you barely knew each other. So what's something surprising, maybe even scandalous, that you've learned about your co-host this year?
That he was almost a molested child actor.
That sounds way more dramatic than the actual story.
Were you a child in that story?
No, I was. That happened a few years ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I got the impression that you were like in grade 8 or something, and
I'm a child at heart, Beth.
and you got out from underneath your parents' nose and just did a secret journey to Toronto to follow your dream.
I mean, that'll be the movie version, yes.
I imagine you as basically the adult version of what happens in Sinister Urged, that dumb broad.
Hey, we haven't watched that one yet.
And I use that deliberately because that is what her character is meant to be.
I believe that story is in episode 2.
Yes, it is. Some would say that's when this show comes together.
Yeah.
All right, Adam, what have you learned about Beth?
One thing that I thought was interesting was Beth has a real keen eye and an interest in how things get made. And that ties back to the architecture question, because you are super interested in the buildings and dancing on about architecture. But
Yes,
furthermore, like you were asking about like the cars and the make of Bart Fargo's watch in episode 2, which I didn't even think about. Like it didn't even strike me as like anything other than a watch. So I thought that was interesting. But the most surprising thing is that Beth's a true metalhead who loves Girl School and John Michael Thor. Woo!
Yeah, I didn't think I was going that way, but, we all discover something about ourselves when we watch MST3K.
Okay, you guys, now dish. What's something your co-host has said or thought that you categorically disagree with?
That the first half hour of Zombie Nightmare isn't the most brilliant thing that has ever happened.
What are you talking about?
It's so good. How do you... It's like bang, 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 bang in terms of like good riffs.
It's aight.
I'm going to have to agree with Beth here.
It's aight.
Ever since Dad got murdered, things have been great.
I stand by what I say. It's like I said, I think it picks up more in the second half. I think there's some really great riffs in the first 10 minutes, and then it peters out, and then it comes back. It's a totally good episode. It's just not my favorite.
I would say that first half hour of Zombie Nightmare is probably the most solid riffing they have.
All right, Adam, what about you?
I guess the thing that we talked about time and again on this podcast is when there was a moment in the film that hit a misogynist or sexist note, like the woman getting slapped by a male hand in The Brain That Wouldn't Die and the clumsy fumblings of Ega, or the death of the nurse in It Conquered the World. Those were all things that took you out of the episode. And I can understand being taken out of the movie for that. But the episode, like we're watching those movies through the lenses of the characters, and they are ripping these moments to shreds.
Mm-hmm.
They're not standing by those. So that would never ruin an episode for me. But several times you stated that it did. And I always found that odd. And we would sometimes talk about that on pod. So that is a thing I disagree with. I get where you are coming from, but I disagree.
And I have to admit, like, that what triggers me for those moments can be a little inconsistent sometimes.
Hence Zombie Nightmare.
Yeah. So, and this will probably come up again when we get to a particular season 7 episode where it's just like, oh, this thing that bothered me in literally every other movie doesn't bother me here.
And it's going to be really interesting when we get to Side Hackers.
Indeed.
Your feelings don't have to be consistent after all.
It's true.
Now a question or two about our show itself. So, the It's Just a Show theme song was created by megaphonic house band Theme Squad. They've also created a variation on that theme song for each regular episode of It's Just a Show. Now, the first year of those variations has been released as an EP, which you listeners can check out at itsjustashow.com/music. You can listen to all of it for free. You can buy it for a few dollars. That would be great. It'd help the show. Or if you support us on Patreon, we'll give you a download code. Anyway, which version of the theme song is your favorite?
Well, I have to follow the irrational choices that come with just liking a thing, for I am not a man who knows music. It is something I do not understand. It's like witchcraft to me. So while there are far more, shall we say, like clever and even interesting versions of the theme. I'm thinking specifically of the pure moodsified werewolf It's Just a Show, even though there are like tons of cool ones like that the tireless elves of Theme Squad have cobbled together. My favorite is a piece of music that's on my phone that I listen to sometimes when I am jogging, and that is the 8-bit version from Warrior of the Lost World, because it is dreamy 8-bit chiptune sounds, not unlike Legend of Zelda 2 or Metroid or any other NES game that kind of followed a somewhat dreamy, surreal vibe. And I love it. I think it sounds great. So it's a piece of music that I listen to on its own, despite the fact that it is the theme tune from the show that I am on all the time.
I also very much enjoyed the Return to Innocence reverb. It was pretty wonderful. And there's some really impressively composed pieces, and I really recommend our listeners to check it out. But just because of who I am, I really love the ragtime version of the theme song, which kind of sounds like The Entertainer. It just brings a little lilt to my soul.
Wait, which one is the ragtime one from? Is that Girlstown?
That's from The Crawling Eye.
Oh, right.
Following that is the song. It has the "Oh No" thing in it.
Oh, from Reptilicus.
Yeah, it's really good. Just because it got that Oompa Loompa feeling of the movie down quite beautifully. And it reminded me of Dirk Pacer, who I didn't talk about, who was also one of my favorite discoveries of this year.
Oh, me too. That was another thing that I had noted was like I watched both versions of Reptilicus, and that was fascinating.
He's really a magnetic presence. Dirk Pacer is in Reptilicus, so he's in the latest season. I think it's episode 1.
Yes.
First episode. And he was an actor from Denmark, and he was their biggest star. He was basically their Jerry Lewis. He's much more charming and affable than Jerry Lewis. And he's in this movie. He doesn't need to be in this movie because his shtick doesn't really fit this very ostensibly serious movie, but he's the only thing worth watching in this movie. So go see it for Dirk Pacer.
Dirk Pacer has or Passer, I've heard it both ways, but he has a great face.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a face like a catcher's mitt, but it's a great face.
He does a lot with it.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to getting a free album, all Patreon supporters also get bonus bits, a few minutes of material that didn't quite make it into the final episode. Listeners, you can go to patreon.com/itsjustashow or itsjustashow.com/Patreon. Sign up and give any amount of money per episode, and you'll be able to hear all of them. So, which bonus bit is your favorite?
I believe that this show is at its best when it is a mixture of both funny and informative. And no bonus bit is funnier or more informative than a little segment called Pleasant Service Announcement. Not only do you learn more about the varied and wonderful career of the late, great Donald Pleasance, the greatest actor of them all, but it continues, and perhaps it may have been the episode that started the proud tradition on It's Just a Show of Adam shows Beth some media to get an honest reaction on air. And we explain it later. In this case, explained, I think, quite well by producer Chris. Plus, there's a great bit about PSAs in it that's super fun.
I am also going to say the Donald Pleasance one was my favorite because not only was it funny, but it really showed the editing chops of our producer Chris.
Indeed.
Like, it's just a really well-produced piece. He took something that was nothing and turned it into something really fun. Okay, I'm going to say that again. Chris took something that was not anything and turned it back into a thing.
First of all,
that didn't help, did it?
No. First of all, that was totally fine. I thought it was interesting to talk about the career of Donald Pleasance, who rules. But I do think that was made quite excellent by Chris's narration of what is largely an audio-driven piece. So mixing his own description for the visuals and Pleasance's audio from his role in the short was really well done. And yeah, I think it was great. But also, it's like that episode has a nice mix of the focused and the light tangents, because you have the talk about Pleasance's career and the short itself that we talk about, called The Spirit of Dark and Lonely Water, about a ghost who eats children, which I thought would be fascinating enough on its own and not nothing. But it also transitions quite nicely into talking about Canadian PSAs, a topic close to both of our hearts.
What I meant was my reactions were just meant to be off mic, and so they weren't meant to be entertaining. But then Chris took it and weaved in the Donald Pleasance narration and his own David Attenborough-esque description of my reaction to the product and turned it into something really, really interesting.
Well, we will put that special bonus bit, Pleasance Service Announcement, at the end of this episode so that you can get a taste for what the bonus bits are like, and you can hear for yourself what exactly the hell we're talking about.
Yep, you'll be saying what Patreons have said all along, which is you threw away the wrong bit. The vote should have come in for our Patreon donors as well. Did they decide on a bonus bit, or was it scattered over the 10 plus of them that there are now?
Well, it was a bit scattered, but there was a winner.
Oh.
So the winner of that little poll was not Pleasant Service Announcement.
What?
It was It's Not That You Shouldn't Meet Your Heroes, when you, Adam, talk about meeting John Kay, the guy who created Ren and Stimpy.
And Canadian Menace.
Whoa.
He brings us all a bad name.
That is admittedly a very compelling listen, because it sounds like you're about to get into a fight, and you tell it very well.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, this has been a lot of fun and a lot of games, but let's get to the big questions that everyone is waiting for. Tell me which of the 24 episodes of Mystery Science Theater 3000 that we've watched this year was in fact your favorite? Beth, please begin.
Zombie Nightmare. I mean, it's definitely in my top 5. And it, to me, is a good example of what I think was the strongest stretch of Mystery Science Theater 3000, which was when Mike took over. And those last few years of Comedy Central, where they still had Frank and they still had Trace. I thought everybody was a powerhouse then. Admittedly, as Adam rightfully pointed out, the sketches were not strong, and this is probably the beginning of the end for good sketches, but the riffing itself is incredible. That said, I will give a shout out to the rehash, the reverb, the reset. Both Star Crash and Cry Wilderness were very entertaining movies, and the riffs were very strong. And I think they have that pace that am always looking for, that I thought was the strongest in season 6 and 7 of Comedy Central. Just not too much, just right. They hit the baby bear.
They hit the baby bear?
They hit the baby bear quotient.
Okay. I would say that those are pretty much 2 of my favorite of the new series apps. We'll get to that other one sometime. My favorite episode of the 24, I would say, is a perfect episode of the show, and possibly the perfect episode of the show. Teenagers from Outer Space. It's wall-to-wall amazing riffs, starting off with a terrific rapid-fire, what you might call even a montage of riffs over what the UFO could possibly be. And it continues on with moments that are culturally relevant, such as the sex shooter ref, or stuff that's just absurd, like when the dog is killed and turned into a bleach white skeleton at the beginning of the movie. And again, this has context, but it's just so funny on its own. Tom Servo chiming in with, "Oh, Michael Jackson will want him now." Or again, later, another skeleton bit in the movie with "'Tis but a flesh wound" when a bleach white skeleton falls to the ground. There's so many good goofs. But riffs aside, what makes or breaks a great episode of MST3K for me is the sketches. And Teenagers from Outer Space might have the best sketches of any single episode.
Wow.
Yeah, it presents Joel and the Bots as a group of good-hearted goofballs who have weird inner lives outside of the show. Like, I love the episodes where they're doing something in addition to the sketch. Like in the sketch where they see the boss spaceship, Tom and Joel are playing red or black. And then later in that very same sketch, Tom mentions that he's been working on a Pegasus doll, and we finally see it, and it's just a robot cow with wings on it that moves automatically. There is, again, some of the sketches in this episode include Dr. F with Rasussa Annie, as described by TV's Frank, as a return to the great American tradition of ventriloquism. Yes, ventriloquism. Big, bold, sassy, and brassy. We've got my favorite MST3K sketch of all time, which is when they sing the General Cinema's snack theme and treats flying in outer space. There's no punchline. It's just good-hearted, weird fun that dares you to like it. And it also has Crow modeling with duct tape.
Yeah, that was really well done.
And another favorite sketch. Again, all of these sketches would be like my favorite sketches. They're all so good. The Reel to Reel, where they talk about how scenes in movies don't always play out in real life. So you have real life and real life. And it descends into Joel turning into Andy Rooney from 60 Minutes, where he just starts listing off complaints. Crow can eat and eat, and he never gains an ounce. My hip hurts. Why? That's one of the things I love about this show, is that it's still every bit as nasty as the show can be. Every bit as biting as the show can be. But it's got that family sweetness that makes the saltiness all that much funnier.
You got your chocolate and your salt.
Yeah, and that's what you want. Together, they taste like teenagers from outer space.
It's hard for me to pick out my favorite episode. Those two are definite contenders. I also have a very soft spot for Rocket Ship XM, and Cry Wilderness is also fantastic. Top tier episode.
Mm-hmm.
And Girls Town, and there's so many good ones. Let's find out. What do you think the listeners' favorite episodes were? Well, no. Let's remember, we had this poll open to more than just our listeners. Any MST3K fan who wanted to could come in and vote. So which episode do you think was preferred by people who don't listen to the show?
Werewolf. People love werewolves so much that I'd have to imagine that would be the thing that would interest people the most who don't actually listen to the show.
Let me put it to you this way. Finding that out was like this year's Oscars, were both The Shape of Water, a fantastic movie, which we talked about a little bit in our Gilman episode, for Revenge of the Creature, and Get Out, another terrific movie, were both nominated for Best Picture. But they didn't win, and instead the Oscar was given to Crash Again for no reason. I dislike Werewolf.
I thought it was good. The episodes, it's a really funny movie, and they do a pretty good job of it.
I will say this. I don't think that's a very good episode of MST3K personally, but don't at me. But I think it's a terrific episode of our show. I think that's a very good It's Just a Show. And we talked a lot about its director, Tony Zarindast, or Zarindast, we're not sure. And watching his other movies, I will now happily say that I will never rent another Tony Zarindast movie ever again. I watched an action movie called Hard Case and Fist, which stars one of the three Storms from Big Trouble in Little China. It is a cop movie that makes no sense and looks like an episode of Garth Marenghi's Dark Place. And there was a erotic thriller called Red Room. That's one of those direct-to-video erotic thrillers where women undress in front of windows and are like become the source of obsession of a photographer for like the first 45 minutes before turning into the Texas Chainsaw Massacre for the last 45. Not great.
So he's not the hidden genius that we all suspected he would be?
Yeah, people describing him as the Persian Ed Wood. No, sir. He is the Persian Tommy Wiseau.
So yes, indeed, Werewolf was the most popular episode for people who don't listen to our show or haven't listened to it yet.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think the most popular episode for the people who do, in fact, listen to our show was?
Oh, if it's Werewolf, you're breaking my heart.
It is not Werewolf.
Yay!
It got a vote or two, but it's not Werewolf.
Okay, interesting.
I'm going to guess Future War.
No, it was not. It was not Future War.
Okay. Then it all comes down to me.
Yes, I'm out of the running now.
Okay. It's not going to be a KTMA. We can scratch that off the list right away, despite the fact that KTMA is excellent.
at least one listener asked us to do more KTMA in season 1 episodes. So
Man,
we're going to do all the episodes eventually.
but yes, an episode guess. We must guess. Now, if I may choose, well, you know what? The big hit of the new series was Cry Wilderness. I'm going to go with that.
That is the correct answer.
Hey-o!
For non-listeners, it was Werewolf, followed up by Cry Wilderness, and then a bunch of other ones, of course. And then for listeners to the show, Cry Wilderness was number 1, followed by It Conquered the World. And what do you think that our listeners' favorite episode of It's Just a Show was?
That's hard. I mean, like, for some people, like, the best episode is the one where things start to get, like, come together. For some people, it's like what they're most interested in being talked about, or perhaps their favorite episode being talked about. So I think for some people, it'd be Werewolf, even though that's a split decision. Like, I don't know. That's a tough one to figure out. I'd say that a podcast is only as good as its most recent episode, so I'm going to say Mole People.
I'm going to go for Future World. For some reason, I get the sense that people really were drawn into the show with that episode because it was a sci-fi one, and I think they were interested to hear what we would do with it. And so that might have gotten the most views and garnered the most interest.
Our viewers.
Yes.
Well, you're both wrong.
Yay!
Wrong. No, actually, the votes for favorite episode were all over the map, and it was pretty widespread. And a lot of people even said that they couldn't decide between all the different episodes. But by the numbers, the winner was a tie between Warrior of the Lost World and Zombie Nightmare.
Hey!
Yay! Yeah.
Both great episodes of our show and Mystery Science Theater 3000.
Well, it looks like it's about time to wrap this celebration up. Do you guys have any final thoughts about this first year of MST3K episodes and this first year of podcasting?
It has been surprisingly academic. And as someone who has to scratch that itch in order to just stay regulated, I appreciate having that outlet, and I've learned so much. So this has been and I don't mean poop regulated, I mean brain regulated.
You just knew I was going to say that immediately after you stopped talking. Our relationship has been cemented over the course of 24 episodes.
I just I heard the bated breath. I'm like, oh God.
Yeah, just like very, very, very quietly on mic, Beth could hear.
So I really appreciate the opportunity to dive deep into places I would otherwise never go. Stop it, Adam.
Anyway, I think that is a delightful answer, and I agree. You know, one of the great things about doing this podcast, if not the greatest thing, is that it's proof that if you get the right friends together and throw what little money you have into a project, you can make something that, while niche, really affects people. And that's why there's 2 Tom Groff fan sites.
Yeah, it's been real fun to hang with you guys.
I gotta say, I will say this, and something I did want to say, if I have not said off pod, is that another treat as part of this is that you and I knew each other through pals, Beth, but this has given us the excuse to sit and chat all the time, and also has led to many off-pod hangings, such as when we went to see the Flophouse, and later watching Zombie Nightmare and The Neverending Story. And that's been a real treat, is making a good pal.
Indeed.
Rock and roll nightmare.
Oh, burn the podcast. The whole episode's ruined.
All right, as always, if you've been affected by the issues on this show, if it's your birthday too, or if you'd like to ask Beth and Adam anything, get in touch with us. Our website is itsjustashow.com, or we're on Twitter at itisjustashow. We loved hearing from you in that survey, and we'd love to hear from you again. It's Just a Show is a podcast from Megaphonic FM. Find all our fancy little shows at megaphonic.fm. Thanks, as always, to our Patreon supporters. You can support It's Just a Show and access some superfan bonus bits like the one you're going to be hearing in just a minute by going to itsjustashow.com/Patreon or patreon.com/itsjustashow. And if you want to follow up on anything that was mentioned today on It's Just a Show, you'll find links in our show notes at itsjustashow.com/episode/24B. And on that note, next time around, we're going to be doing, as we told you, Season 8, Episode 4, The Deadly Mantis. But until then...
Happy anniversary to you all, and to all a good anniversary.
And thank you to all the folks out there who've been listening to us for the last year. We're really looking forward to the next one.
Onwards to year 2.
Excellent. Take it away, bonus bit.
To properly appreciate this bonus bit, you'll need to speak a language called animal.
There's a recurring bit of business in Pleasance's career about scaring children with his spooky voice, as there is an immortal scene in Halloween where his character has been perched outside of a murderer's house for the entirety of the film, and the murderer has not shown up yet. And so some kids decide to enter the house as a prank, and Pleasance, who has been hiding behind a shrubbery for most of the movie, and with an extremely worried look on his face, finally gets to enjoy a moment of Halloween fun and whispers, "Hey, get your ass away from there." And all the kids run away. And the camera lingers on what feels like 10 minutes on Donald Pleasance's eating grin. It's one of the best moments in any movie. But that also ties into this infamous PSA, this public service announcement that aired a lot in Britain that I absolutely love. That's called "The Spirit of Dark and Lonely Water." Did you get a chance to see this?
I did not get a chance to look at it. Maybe I can do it now.
Yeah, you can if you like.
Okay, here we go.
All right.
All right. There's a link in the show notes for those of you who want to watch along with Beth, but since this is a podcast, I, producer Chris, shall describe what's happening on screen.
I am the spirit of dark and lonely water, ready to trap the unwary, the show-off, the fool.
And next to a lake of brackish water, we see death personified.
What is...
Cut to a small muddy pool, surrounded by children.
What are those children doing?
They're playing. Death looks on. One boy isn't careful.
Oh, something bad's going to happen to these kids.
And the boy slips into the pool and dies. Death gloats.
The show-offs are easy.
Cut to a lake. A lone boy pokes...
Is that the Grim Reaper?
Yes. A lone boy pokes a stick into the water, holding onto a tree branch for support, but the branch is rotten and snaps.
My goodness.
Only a fool would ignore this.
A sign reads, "Danger, no swimming." We pan over a junkyard of rusted-out cars and sinks and furniture. Nearby is a lake in which yet another boy flails and cries for help. And indeed, some other kids do want to help.
Oh, look, there's someone in the water. Quick, use that big stick to get him out.
Sensible children.
Donald Pleasance, you are creepy.
Death has been thwarted, and he vanishes, leaving behind only his robe.
Why did the Grim Reaper take off his robe?
Because these children are too sensible. They find Death's robe and toss it in the water.
Man, rivers were really polluted back in the 70s.
I think it's always like that in Britain.
The end, for now.
All right, that was incredible.
How would you describe that, Beth, now having seen that with fresh eyes?
If I was a kid, I would be terrified.
Yeah, they used Donald Pleasance's voice perfectly. He plays this, like, wood sprite that looks like the Grim Reaper.
You're not sure if he's trying to warn you against river accidents or he's feeding off of the corpses and fall into them.
Well, when they do ward off that last kid at the end, because it's all about all the foolish children who are brought into the water for the ghost. When the children find the spirit's discarded cloak, which I guess is his like only physical form in this world, I'm not quite sure of the ghost rules of this 1970s British PSA about being a smart kid. But when they throw that cloak into the water, you just hear Pleasance intone, "I'll be back."
I'll be back.
Sadly, not popularizing that phrase the way Schwarzenegger did. So I assume he is dining on children's bones. But yeah, I don't know. That also brings me back to a wonderful time in which PSAs were like terrifying and like nightmarish, and they like stayed with you. If I was a kid, I would have simultaneously thought that was like the coolest thing I ever saw, and it would have legit given me nightmares. But it has kind of a return to Oz quality, wouldn't you say?
Oh, indeed. It immediately made me think of one of my favorite movies in Return to Oz. But I should say, because I'm sure if we don't, someone's going to correct us. PSAs are still terrifying. You've seen the Canadian one where she slips on something and ends up falling through a glass coffee table, and she just like is shuddering and crying in the background. trying to
Yeah.
extract her like broken, bloody body out of it.
Yes, are you referring to the infamous "There are no accidents" ads?
Yes.
My favorite, of course, is I'm about to have an accident, and of course, she spills boiling water all over herself, and it's done like a shot cut of a horror movie. You just see her briefly writhing with scarred fingers and face, and then it just jump cuts to preventit.ca. Myself and my friend Juanita are obsessed with those ads, and every now and then, when it's like really late at night and we see that we're both online, we will send it to each other with a comment. Although she hasn't done it lately because she hasn't forgiven me for sending her a picture of the monster from the Lights Out short really late at night.
Are you trying to ensure that you both have unpleasant sleeps?
I don't know, man. Seeing monsters and stuff gives me pleasant sleeps. And pleasant sleeps when I see the spirit of dark and lonely water.